What do we know about what's happening inside the State Department right now? I presume that they are maintaining the plans right now to evacuate the embassy, to remain in a defensive posture with the military just to get Americans out. I presume those plans haven't changed.
Well, there's a high level of urgency in the State Department right now, primarily because there's concern about the safety of the diplomatic personnel there in Kabul. They're saying it's not a full evacuation. They are reducing civilian staff, and that's the reason that the military is bringing back 3,000 troops to Afghanistan to be at the Kabul International Airport in order to help evacuate much of the civilian personnel from the embassy and also a number of Afghans who are seeking asylum who worked with the United States in Afghanistan. But there's a lot of concern because this is, as you said, is a rapidly changing situation. The sweep of the Taliban across the country, as they've claimed, provincial center after provincial center, has been breathtaking. And so really the fear as the Taliban gets closer and closer to Kabul and encircles the capital is that things could change quickly again. And while right now there doesn't seem to be any sort of direct threat to American personnel and their allies in Kabul, the Taliban are as close as 80, 50, even 30 miles from Kabul. So the fear is that that could change overnight or in a matter of hours.
And Missy, just to be clear, I think this probably goes without saying, but just to be clear, the airport, as it's been described by a number of people, is sort of the key right here. If they can't get Americans out, if the airport falls, then everyone who's there is pretty much stuck. There aren't a whole lot of other ways to get them out easily or safely.
That's right. The United States used to have a major air base, Bagram, which is outside of Kabul. That was the main military air hub, but that was surrendered to or given back to the Afghans earlier this summer. So what you have is the International Commercial Airport in Kabul, which also has a section where the U.S. military and the Turkish military operate out of. And right now that's operating normally. There are still civilian flights coming and going. And so you're right, it is the key. Obviously, Afghanistan, a landlocked country, and not an easy place to get to. And it certainly is a lifeline for the people who are concerned about their safety at this point.
Adam Weinstein, what happened? How did we get from where we were in 2003 with that clip we played of President Karzai and Secretary Rumsfeld to 2021, where it's looking like the Taliban are pretty much going to control all of Afghanistan? What happened?
Well, I think a few things happened. One, the Bush administration became distracted by Iraq. Two, we were fighting a counterinsurgency, and we were fighting an insurgency as a counterinsurgency. And the problem with fighting an insurgency is that oftentimes when you have the most leverage to bring them to the negotiating table and perhaps get a deal that would be beneficial, that will be the moment when you also think victory is right around the corner, which is why you have that leverage to begin with. And I think our military leaders and also our civilian leaders deluded themselves into thinking that a military victory was right around the corner, when in fact all the Taliban had to do was really keep fighting. And we've seen that the Afghan security forces that we invested billions of dollars into and 20 years of training, were not able to hold up for even a month.
Well, I was just about to ask you about that, about the forces that are left behind to fight the Taliban, because the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby was asked whether or not the U.S. really believes the Afghan military is up to this task. Here's part of what he said.
Many times this week you've said the Afghan forces have the advantage. What proof can you offer as the Taliban have taken over now vast majorities of the country and they've now surrounded Kabul?
That the Taliban have moved with the speed with which they have, and that the resistance that they have faced has been insufficient to stop those, to check those advances, does not mean, Lucas, that the advantages aren't still there. You have to use it. You have to be willing to apply it.
Makes sense, John.
Yes,
you're saying that they have all the advantages as they're getting crushed on the battlefield. It makes no sense to say they have the advantage. The Taliban appear to have all the advantages right now.
Lucas, I appreciate the effort again. They have greater numbers. They have an Air Force, a capable Air Force, which, oh, by the way, is flying more airstrikes than we are every day. They have modern equipment. They have organizational structure. they have the benefit of the training that we have provided them over 20 years. They have the material, the physical, the tangible advantages. It's time now to use those advantages.
No, on the ground, it looks rather different. There was one woman in Kandahar that told Al Jazeera today, almost in tears, they literally sold us out. There was no government resistance. I never imagined that Kandahar would be taken so easily. Before I have to let you two go, and Missy, I'm going to come back to you in a second. Adam, what do you think the Afghan Defense Forces are actually capable of doing against the Taliban?
This isn't a matter of capabilities, and the reality is they're not being crushed on the battlefield. They're simply not fighting. The Taliban have been very effective in creating deals province by province, and they've been nothing less than Machiavellian in the way they've convinced large groups of Afghan security forces to simply surrender and hand over their weapons. And this is due to lack of leadership from the top in the Afghan government, but it's also due to mistakes that the United States made over the course of the 20-year war. And the chaos we're seeing unfold right now is a natural consequence of the intervention that happened 2 decades ago. The withdrawal is just the final chapter.
Well, Missy, with regards to those mistakes, I don't know how we view now the deal that the Trump administration made with the Taliban, the peace deal that it signed last February, which laid the conditions for the exit. I mean, the UN came out with a report stating that many, if not all, of the objectives in the deal would prove challenging. The Taliban were prepared for a so-called fighting season against the Afghan forces. How do we reflect on that deal from last February now?
Well, the deal was really intended to kickstart a negotiating process that could yield a political settlement after these 2 decades of fighting. And it hasn't. What has happened is that the United States complied with its agreement to withdraw its forces, and the Taliban has arguably complied with none or very few of the conditions on its end of the deal. And so, while there is a peace process that is nominally happening, it really hasn't made any significant progress on the substance of, a future political settlement. And so, you can view the deal as having been, a necessary step to get to a stage of the conflict that hadn't occurred yet, which was at least the two sides sitting down in a room together. You can also view it as something that led to this situation that we're in right now, where there's a lot of civilian suffering and anxiety in Afghanistan.
And before I have to let you go, Adam, what about the prospect of additional U.S. military intervention? The former NATO commander, retired General John Allen, has said that President Biden should reverse his decision to withdraw and reopen the Bagram Air Base, called this the makings of a true disaster. Also today, Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is calling for more airstrikes, writing in part, if the U.S. fails to do so, the security threat will assuredly grow and the humanitarian cost will be catastrophic. Adam, before we have to let you two go, what about that? The prospect of more airstrikes or just other military intervention in the U.S.? Or is the U.S. actually out of Afghanistan for real?
I think the U.S. is out of Afghanistan for real, and reversing that course would be a mistake. It's easy to have a revisionist account about what the last 20 years looked like. Look, when Kunduz fell in 2015, it took U.S. airstrikes, it took special forces on the ground, and ultimately we bombed Doctors Without Borders hospital, and I believe we killed around 40 people. So it's important not to look at the past with rose-colored glasses. I don't think there was a military solution, and the reason the Doha Agreement was flawed was because it reflected the fact that there wasn't a military solution and the Taliban had the leverage.